Imagine being a teenager and having 20 armed men storm into your room just because you posted a TikTok video criticizing the government.
This is a bloody regime. They beat me. They kick me with their combat boots.
Or sending telegram messages about police violence and winding up in a prison camp.
6 years for 9 messages. That's 9 months per message. Simple math.
Or having to flee your homeland as a child because your parents were jailed as enemies of the state after fighting for democracy.
What's your biggest dream? For my dad to come back, healthy and unharmed.
In Belarus, one of Europe's most repressive countries, these things can happen to those who speak out against the regime.
My name's Nastya. My mum was in prison for nearly 5 years, and my dad is still in jail.
Nastya and her brother Vanya now live in Warsaw. Their parents were both active in the Belarusian opposition movement and were arrested during the 2020 presidential election campaign. Fearing the children would be sent to an orphanage, their grandmother fled with them across the border to Poland. Their mother Antonina was released a year ago and was able to join the children in Warsaw. When they were reunited, the children took a while to recognize her. During the years in the jail, she was only allowed to talk to them once a month for 5 minutes.
I didn't recognize her at first because the only contact we'd had was video calls. Then I cried with happiness and with sadness at what we'd gone through in those years.
Do you remember me?
Since 1994, Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus with an iron fist. Political opposition and free media are systematically suppressed and opponents are jailed. There are no free elections. During the 2020 presidential elections, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya ran against Lukashenko. Independent election observers believed her to be in the lead, but Lukashenko officially declared himself the winner. Allegations of massive election fraud were followed by nationwide protests, which were brutally suppressed by security forces. Thousands were arrested.
Kids, are you dressed?
Antonina was also arrested. After supporting Tikhanovskaya in the election campaign, she was classified an extremist and sent to a women's prison camp in Gomel.
In a prison camp, tears aren't allowed. It's impossible. But there were moments when I had to cry. It was awful to think they equated me with terrorists, those who kill people. How is that even possible?
In prison camps, political prisoners are subject to specially strict rules. There are reports of torture, extortion, and mistreatment. The family is still missing a member. The children's father has been in a penal colony for more than 5 years. They say phone calls are forbidden and letters never arrive. The children cling on to their fading memories of their father.
I've completely forgotten the sound of his voice. Sometimes I have this nightmare that they could come and kill my dad at any moment, any second, even any millisecond. That scares me.
All we can do is wait for his release.
Vanya and Nastya aren't the only ones. Warsaw has become a hub for exiled opponents of the regime in Minsk. After the mass protests of 2020 were violently suppressed, around 350,000 Belarusians fled across the border to Poland into the European Union. And the Belarusian government is still persecuting its critics. According to the Vyasna Human Rights Center, there are currently around 1,200 political prisoners in Belarus. Many arrive in Warsaw with nothing but a backpack. Anna from the Belarusian Solidarity Center shows us how the organization offers practical help.
This is our boutique, where our political prisoners can pick out some clothes. Here are our long-sleeve shirts.
Oleg is among those being helped by the Solidarity Center. At the age of 16, he was sent to a juvenile prison camp for 3 years after he posted TikTok videos critical of the government. He wasn't allowed visitors and even spent 130 days in solitary confinement.
In the juvenile prison camp, there were orders that I should be beaten for my political views. Sometimes they beat me 3 times a day with a stick, with their hands, their feet. Afterwards, I had 3 hematomas.
After his release, Oleg fled to Poland. The first thing he did was dye his hair pink. He wanted to be free, to be able to look different without it being dangerous.
How are you now, compared to when you first came here?
Good. I know I can always get help here if I have worries.
Through the Solidarity Center, Oleg is also receiving therapy. And here in Poland, he is free from political repression. Opposition politician Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is working to free more people jailed by the regime. Since 2020, she's been representing Belarus democratic movement from exile and pressing for the release of political prisoners like Antonina. She also mobilizes support further afield in places like Berlin and Brussels and wants to keep putting pressure on Lukashenko until systematic political change becomes possible.
Of course, there's always a hope, but it's huge work, from democratic forces, our human rights defenders, diplomats, our civil society, not to let the world forget about political prisoners and do everything possible to release them. But what is more important, that the repressions will end.
Here at the Belarusian Youth Center in Warsaw, Tikhanovskaya and others are writing letters to prisoners. Whether they'll reach the intended recipients is uncertain. But Antonina, who was jailed for supporting Tikhanovskaya in the election campaign, received a postcard from the politician that gave her strength during a difficult time.
I kept your card throughout my entire time in prison. Those lines meant so much to me. It actually reached you? Yes. Wow.
Tikhanovskaya's husband Sergei was also imprisoned for more than 5 years. For 2 of those years, there was no sign he was alive. When he was released, he was barely recognizable.
It was even difficult for me to recognize my husband, though I knew that people are losing weight in prisons, that people look differently. But my daughter, she just was really stuck. She says, "Who is this person?"
In December 2025, the Lukashenko regime released 123 political prisoners as part of a deal with the Trump administration. In exchange, the US eased sanctions. Western sanctions had been imposed on Belarus in response to human rights violations, as well as President Lukashenko's support for Russia's war against Ukraine. Alexei was one of the prisoners who was released. Like many others, he was taken to Poland.
When I arrived here, I realized that I was finally truly safe and free. For the first time, I had a really deep and restful sleep. I wasn't worried about anything anymore. Thoughts about the alarm going off, about having to get up at 6 a.m., they just disappeared. I just lay down and slept. It was wonderful.
Age 19, Alexei was jailed for 6 years for 9 Telegram messages criticizing police violence during mass protests. He says that while in solitary confinement, he was tortured by the cold temperature.
In my cell, I'd wake up every half hour shivering from the cold. I'd do squats, sit-ups, and about 30 push-ups. Then I'd sleep for another half hour, and so on through the night.
Now Alexei shares a room with 2 other former prisoners in an emergency shelter in Warsaw. In the penal colony, there were 20 prisoners in one room. But their freedom comes at a cost. Many of the former prisoners will face new charges if they return.
What an interesting view. As long as this regime is in power in Belarus, I obviously have no intention of returning. That's a red line for me. I know that as soon as I set foot on Belarusian soil, I'll be arrested immediately and taken to prison.
Alexei's parents are still in Belarus. After 4 years of separation, he still doesn't know when he'll be able to see them again. For exiled relatives of political prisoners, the only thing they can do is try to make their voices heard. That's why they gather every Sunday in Warsaw, whatever the weather. In Belarus, even a small protest like this would be unthinkable. Nastya has come here with her family. She wants people to know what's happened to her father.
Freedom for political prisoners. Long live a free Belarus. I know that we can't give up. People can't forget that we exist. They mustn't forget that there's a great suffering going on in Belarus. It's a dictatorship that never ends.
Their homeland is only about 200 kilometers away from Warsaw, and yet right now it seems unreachable. But the goal is clear: a life without fear in Belarus.
I want to return to a free Belarus. Every person has some kind of goal in life. I can choose my own path, and I'll make sure I fight for it.
I hope and believe that everything will come to an end at some point. I hope it happens sooner rather than later, because my family is in Belarus and I'm here alone. I have someone to go back to. I have my family, my friends, everyone.
For now, Nastya and Vanya are growing up in Warsaw without their father. This is what they would say to him if they could.
Hello, Dad. It's us, Vanya and Nastya. You haven't been with us for a long time, but we think about you every day. We'll wait for you as long as we have to. To us, you're the best dad in the world.